Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session entitled SDG Toolbox and Environmental Sustainability. My name is Tim McAloon, and I'm a professor at the Department of Mechanical Engineering here at DTU, and it's a pleasure to facilitate for me this session on the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can ask yourselves the question, why should the Sustainable Development Goals be part of a high-tech summit? And you guys know the answer to that, of course. And we're going to hear 5 other answers as to why this morning. The session is going to be run such that we're going to hear 2 scientific pitches first from DTU. And then we're going to hear 3 pitches from 3 different consultancy companies. They're going to give short pitches first. They've promised they're going to stick within 12 minutes. And if they don't, they're going to get a big hug from me and we'll pull them off the stage. After that, there'll be 3 minutes per pitch for questions of clarity and so that we can change over. And then at the end of the 5 pitches, we're going to take a round of discussion, which if you don't have any questions, I do, but I guess you're going to have lots of questions about how do we actually approach the Sustainable Development Goals from all of the different viewpoints that we'll see through the pitches. We're going to start with Michael Howell, who is the person who is actually organized this session. And Michael is professor at the group of Quantitative Sustainability Assessment in the Sustainability Division in the Department of Management Engineering here at DTU. He's going to give us an introduction as to the SDGs and sustainability as a framing discussion. And then we're going to hear from Nikolai, also from DTU Management Engineering. And after that, we're going to look Michael's going to give us a view about the screening tool and a screening tool for SDGs. And then we're going to hear from Nana from NIOS, from Carsten from COVI, and from Nikki from AMBUL. And then after that, the discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome Michael Howell from the Department of Management Engineering.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much, and welcome all. It's great to see such a big crowd here. This is one of the big sessions of the High Tech Summit, which I think is really encouraging. This is a special theme of the High Tech Summit this year, apart from machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, and so forth, focusing on the sustainability, the role of technology in that. And this one more particularly focusing on the toolbox for assessing sustainability. And we agreed that it would probably be a good idea that, to bring us on a common page, we start with a bit of framing, as Tim said, talking about what is sustainability actually, and what are the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure you all know them, but just a bit of background on them, and then finally some principles for how to measure sustainability. So the starting point, well, it goes back in history, of course, but this is what perhaps really kicked it off in 1987. The United Nations Commission on Environmental Development, the Brundtland Commission, in their work, Our Common Future, among many other things, coined a sustainable development as a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this is about meeting needs. It doesn't say anything about the environment here, actually. But there are some challenges in here. There's a lot of elasticity, which is also reflected by the broad acceptance of this definition. Nobody challenges that this is what we should do. We should meet the needs of the present, and we should do it in a way that does not compromise future generations to meet their abilities to meet their needs. So I think nobody in the Danish Parliament would probably question that. This is what we should do. This is the way we should move. But we know they have very different visions for a future society. And one of the reasons is the elasticity in terms of which needs. It doesn't say anything about which needs, just says the needs. And there are many needs, from the basic physiological needs. We have a certain need for nutrition and clothing and shelter and whatnot. Safety, feeling safety. And then higher levels of need, belongingness and love, esteem, self-actualization. It doesn't position this anywhere in that pyramid. So everybody can have their own vision of what are we talking about here. Another thing, of course, is how are they met? This is increasingly difficult to see, not how they are met today. We have some idea about that, but how will they be met in the future? If you think about technology development, I think we are in many ways on exponential development curves for many of the core drivers of technology development. and to predict just 20 years ahead what technology will be and how it will help to meet human needs is really a challenge. But of course it's also a great opportunity for the kind of research and the kind of education that we are running here. Another thing that followed the Brundtland Commission was Elkington's introduction of the idea of the triple bottom line, that the company that wants to be sustainable needs to consider both the environment, society, and the economy. So environment up here is actually about, in this, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So if we want to do that, we need to take care of the environmental impacts of the way in which we're meeting needs. And this is was Elkington's image here, that a company, sustainable company, needs to at the same time optimize the economical bottom line, of course, the use of economical capital, financial capital, but also natural capital and social capital. So this is what we had to operate with in the 80s and 90s. And then in 2000, the United Nations adopted the Millennium Development Goals. They were also somehow about sustainability, at least about social sustainability. 8 goals to help the poorest achieve better living standards by 2015. These are the goals here. And those of you who know the Sustainable Development Goals will see that there is some repetition here. They were quite successful. I think that was an experience in the United Nations, that this about setting goals for a 15-year time horizon and having all the member states adopt these goals and then follow up on the goals, the achievement of the goals, on an annual or biannual basis, really created a continued focus. And this was a nice exercise, and this was a nice approach, that when they ran out in 2015, I think a few years before, it was realized, hey, we need to continue with this. And one of the realizations was, it was not successful in the way that all these, as you can see, they are not all met. But there was great progress. China moved, 400, 500 million people out of poverty in that period of time. Also progress in many other parts of the world. But there's only one here which is about ensuring environmental sustainability, and I think that was the realization. If we want this to be sustainable, we need to look much more widely. We need to look much more widely. So this is what the 17 development goals are about. That is the whole dimension, or the whole palette of sustainability we have in here. And if we go back to the triple bottom line thinking, the first 5 here are about people. The next are not about profit, because this is for countries. So here it's about prosperity of the societies. And then we have some that are about the planet, the 3 Ps here. Of course, the 3 down here, the climate action, the life below water, and life on land. But also good health and well-being is very strongly related to environmental conditions and clean water and sanitation. So this is our interpretation. These belong in the planet. And then there are 2 more Ps. Peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships for the goal. So 5 Ps in total. A very important point here for a high-tech summit is that very many of these goals are strongly technology-driven. That means that technology has to play a very important role if we are to achieve the goals. And this is why it is particularly relevant to discuss sustainable development at a high-tech summit like this. And underneath the goals, just to remind us, we have a lot of targets. So there are overall goals, but what are the targets that need to be achieved by 2030? So you can see here there's 169 targets in total. So on average, roughly 10 targets per goal, a bit unevenly distributed. And then a number of indicators. I don't think it's 242 at the moment. It was at a certain time, but this varies a bit. So how do we measure these targets? And I think this is important for us to keep in mind when we're going to discuss how do we actually measure SDG performance. We need to relate to these targets. But what's the relevance of these targets to companies? Because this is for nations, remember? So how do we interpret this into something that makes sense for a company or for a business or for a research project? We'll, I think, have the chance to discuss that more today. Yeah. That was the first point. The other one I would like to go into is about how to measure sustainability. A very important point here is, I think, is that when we want to look at sustainability of a technology, we need to think life cycle. So here we have a product. Is this a sustainable product? Well, that's actually the content of a full days of discussion, what that means, that a product is sustainable. But if we want to address sustainability of products, we need to consider that in order for this product to exist, it first has to be produced. it has to be distributed, and in order to produce it, we need to extract raw materials. And in order to use it, we need to produce electricity, and of course also to produce it. And when it doesn't serve its purpose anymore, we'll take it to the recycling station, and hopefully we'll be able to reuse parts of the product in new production, or at least to recycle the materials in the product. This is the circular economy thinking. And unfortunately, part of it will still, in many parts of the world, end up in landfills, waste incineration, or what have you. This is the life cycle of the product. And sustainable means it is sustainable from a systems perspective. We need to think about the whole life cycle, because otherwise we run the risk of problem shifting, where we are solving problems in one part of the life cycle by changing the technology in order to meet a sustainable development goal target perhaps, but then inadvertently we create problems elsewhere. Or between different types of impact. We have 17 different categories of impact, 169 indicators of impact, and there are many possibilities of trade-off. And this is one of the big challenges that we will have to address. And I really look forward to this program, and now we'll give on the floor to Mikolaj of Shania, who will give you a much deeper insight in some of the research that he's been doing on how we can use these SDG indicators, or how they don't serve as indicators of environmental sustainability.
Thank you, Mikkel.
Thank you very much. Welcome. My name is Mikołaj Owsianiak, and I'll be presenting some of the work that we have done in our group on evaluating the SDG indicators as goals of environmental sustainability. So the 2030 agenda for sustainable development says that we are determined to protect the planet from degradation, so that it can support the needs of the present and future generations. And this statement has inspired our research question, which is, will the SDGs do the job for the planet? In other words, if we meet all the goals as measured using the indicators that were proposed, will we achieve the state of environmental sustainability? This is the research question which we are addressing here. So that, just to give you an example of targets and indicators, there are many of them, but for goal 9, for example, we see a target, 9.4, which is to upgrade infrastructure and retrofit industries to make them sustainable. And the indicator for this target is CO2 emission per unit of value added. There are more examples, there are more targets, more indicators. What we have done is we look at all indicators, all 232 indicators, and looked into which of them relate to environmental sustainability. And what we understand by environmental sustainability is the 3 categories of concern that we are interested in. So environmental sustainability, in our view, is, or in general view, is about human health, something that relates to mortality or morbidity issues influenced by, for example, exposure to fine particulate matter. But it's also about ecosystem quality, different types of ecosystems and environments. And environmental sustainability is also about resources, like metals, for example, that we use in today's technologies. Many of them are scarce, we may lose them. But it's also about biotic resources, land, water, to less extent about the ecosystem services and cultural heritage. So the question is, which of the SDG indicators, the official set that proposed by the UN, relate to environmental sustainability? We found 45 which do it. And this is how they distributed across different areas of concern for environmental sustainability. So you will see that approximately 1/3 of them addresses human health, about 1/3 addresses ecosystem quality, and another 1/3 approximately addresses resources. And different types of resources, ecosystems, are roughly equally represented. This is a good news, because SDGs actually respond to our concerns in relation to the environment. The next question is then, which of these 45 indicators are actually good ones? Which of them meet some sort of criteria? Which of them are good indicators given the targets they're supposed to represent? We address this question by developing 9 criteria of what a good indicator is, what a good SDG indicator is. The first set of criteria addresses environmental boundaries. And to illustrate you with an example what it is about, I will use the planet thinking, ecological footprint thinking. We know we have one planet. And what we do today, we extract resources from this planet, the services that it provides to support our living. Unfortunately, average European consumes resources equivalent to what nearly 3 planets should provide. This is too much. So the first criterion for the target is about whether sustainability objective, the boundary, is defined in the target. It could be defined in many ways. For example, one way would be to reduce our pressure on the planet or our impact by half. If this criterion is met, this could be the outcome then. So we need second criteria which says something about whether the sustainability objective represents a reduction that is sufficient to make the sector sustainable. We would like to be in this situation here for all the targets. We also have criterion about whether indicator focuses on effectiveness in reaching the target rather than on efficiency in performing on the target. And I will explain with an example later what this one is about. Then we have consistency criteria, 2 of them, which says something about whether indicator is a sufficient descriptor of the issue addressed by the target. So with the planet example, if we focus on climate change only, we may, for example, overlook that there are also land use issues or water use issues. If we want to say something meaningful about environmental sustainability, we need indicators which cover all the issues that we are concerned with. Also, link between indicator and related target should be clear. This is pretty obvious, but there are examples when this link is really not there. Indicators may be far-fetched. And lastly, we have 4 criteria which are impact related. So we should have indicators which account for the potency of different stressors to cause environmental damage. In other words, we would like the indicator to be able to distinguish between CO2 and methane, or between gold and iron, for example, or iron and sand. This is the type of approach. Indicators should also consider geographic differences in sensitivity of receiving ecosystems. So this is a map which shows availability of water as it depends on the watershed and geographic location. So there is higher level of regionalization here in availability of water. A good indicator should reflect this somehow. Lastly, we would like indicators to allow prioritizing chemical substances and identifying sources which contribute most to total damage. There has to be a clear link that enables us to track which sources contribute to damage. How can company or how can a country improve its environmental performance against the indicator? We need, against the target, we need indicators which match this. And finally, indicators should not overlap. So there are 9 criteria listed here, and as an illustrative example, we have evaluated this target indicator pair. So the first 2 criteria are actually about the target, and the others are about the indicator itself. And this is the outcome. Yellow is good, blue is good, yellow is bad. So we see that this target, well, it's lacking a sustainability objective defined. Well, we don't know what level of upgrade is needed and what actually is meant by sustainable infrastructure and industries. This is the major limitation of this target. We can also see that this indicator here, it focuses on efficiency on performing on the target because it is expressed in the unit of CO2 emission per unit of value added. And there is, of course, nothing bad with optimizing performance, in optimizing this, unless total value added increases. Then any benefits that you gain will be simply lost because total value added has increased. A good indicator should reflect that, and this one doesn't. So how does it look for all the indicators? This is the total picture, all 45 indicators given here. So the glass is either half full or half empty, depending how you want to look at it. The most often criterion, or the criterion that is not met most often, is the first criterion about boundaries, yellows in most places. There are also indicators which don't perform very well on the criteria related to the impact. Some examples of a good one. This is a really good one. It's the only indicator which performs well on our criteria. It's for SDG 14. The target is to effectively regulate harvesting and end overfishing, restore fish stocks to levels that can produce maximum sustainable yield. And the indicator is proportion of fish stocks within biologically sustainable level. Scientists, biologists know when a fish stock can be considered at its biologically sustainable level. This is very well defined. And another example of a slightly worse indicator, SDG 11, with the target to enhance inclusive and sustainable urbanization. Indicator for that is ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate. Again, boundary is not defined in the target, and many other shortcomings here. So I will conclude with this, that meeting the SDGs may not ensure the state of environmental sustainability. And this may sound like not the good news, but I think the glass is actually half full. Major progress has been made, so indicators need some tweaks, perhaps some improvements to make them better suited to address what we are concerned with in relation to environmental sustainability. Thank you for this, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Miguel. Any questions or clarifications before we go on to the next speaker? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Danish Business Authority. I'm just wondering, will you also be doing this check on the coming European taxonomy for sustainable finance?
Hi, my name is Daniela Cox. I am from Galapagos. Because of the situation with the Amazon and the rainforest and the importance of considering the indigenous people, it just caught my attention that the cultural heritage represents just 1% almost in the spheric representation. So I'm wondering if nowadays, due to the current events with the Amazon, the SDGs are thinking about including the indigenous people's participation, and the cultural heritage is a very important aspect, because the indigenous people represent globally just 2% of the global people, but they protect 85% of the resources. And I'm talking about the people in the Amazon, also in Ecuador, the indigenous people from the Andes that were striking in Ecuador very strongly, and they have their reasons. Because they provide the resources for the cities. And even though we are isolated, also in Galapagos, and we are indigenous people, folklorically speaking, politically speaking, there is this important need of the local communities to make our voice heard. And in Galapagos, for example, it's a lot about nature, flora and fauna. I have been a guide on more different expeditions than National Geographic, but there's this big gap about including the history of local people and the good things we do for conservation.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm not. So there are 232 indicators as of today, and I have only looked at those which are strictly related to the environment. So it could be that some of the issues that you raise are covered by the more social-oriented indicators. I don't have a full overview of those to be able to say whether they actually represent the issues with indigenous people.
That would be nice. The other one is a piece of information as well. This session, sorry, we should have said that at the beginning, is videotaped. We have consent from all presenters that this is okay, but there's been quite an interest from people in other parts of the country to be able to see it. It's not live streamed, but we'll make it available or accessible for them to see it later. That way we also save some traveling, which is fine, but just so you're informed. Okay, so what I'm going to present you now is a tool, an assessment tool for sustainability implications of research projects. This is a piece of work that we've done in my group in the context of a PhD course that we have been asked by DTU to develop a PhD course which is mandatory for all PhD students enrolled at DTU since 1st of April 2019. So 450 to 500 PhD students per year will be trained in sustainability analysis, sustainability thinking around their research project. And this is the method that we have developed and are developing, as you will see, for this purpose. But I think there are some things in here that could be interesting also outside just the world of research projects. So, the major features of the new tool is that it's targeted at PhD research projects, as I said. That is a challenge in itself because it's very, what can you say, it's not very concrete and manifest yet what are actually the sustainability potential, what are the potential impacts at all of the project. We've been inspired by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and Lifecycle Assessment methodology, both of which are standardized by ISO standards. And we take a life cycle perspective in the guideline for the reasons I mentioned before. This is essential that we have the full life cycle perspective so that we become aware of problem shifting in there. It supports an iterative assessment. We try to have a transparent and structured assessment and use it to identify focus points and quantify potential improvements so that the PhD students can, while they're still working on their project, have possibilities of taking learnings in from this and actually change the approach that they take in their research project or the aims. And it's still under development. So, we have a framework consisting of 5 steps. The first one is to identify the potential applications because it's a research project. So it's not a concrete technology change, but it's a research project which could be whatever, an improved algorithm for 3D scanning, for instance, just to take one of the more extreme, but could also be something that's a bit closer to actual applications. So we need first to identify the potential applications, and then we scope the system that we're analyzing. So we look at what is the baseline, what's the situation without, and what would be the situation with the implementation of these potential or these results. Then we map the potential effects of the project applications on the sustainable, or we map the potential effects, and then we evaluate how does that then, if these effects come about in society, how does that affect SDGs, which SDGs are affected, and then finally, the final phase is interpretation. What are the main impacts, and what causes them, which improvement potentials are there. So let's think about an example here. An example research project could be something that is around development of a new electrolyte that increases the storage capacity of lithium-ion battery technologies. But that's one of the more concrete, as you can imagine. Well, what's the most likely application of that research project in the society? Well, of course, e-mobility is an obvious thing to consider here. We'll apply it in the battery, and that will have consequences, of course, for the whole use stage of the car. What's the baseline? Well, what is the situations without the application, the situation as it is, and what is the situation, the new system that we will be facing if this is applied. So it's not just a matter of identifying which potential applications are there, but of course also scale, geographically and magnitude-wise. And of course these are hugely influential on the SDG impacts that we will see from this. So the baseline here could be the relative decrease or the outphasing in conventional internal combustion engine cars or vehicles, and increase of electric vehicles. So here we have some scenarios from 2015 and on to 2030 for how we see that running. The blue is the internal combustion engine vehicle. We have battery-driven hybrids and so forth, different technologies. And we could imagine, okay, with the new system where we have an increased storage capacity in the battery, we have meeting the concerns of many people around electric vehicles that the range is too short, we will see a more rapid phasing out of the internal combustion engine, a more rapid increase of the battery-driven electric vehicles, but also the hybrids, which also benefit from this, and the range extended, which also benefit from this. This is just an example, and I would be happy not to have specific questions about the scenario, because this is to illustrate the use of the guideline. Okay, what's the life cycle of the baseline? So here we have a life cycle of the passenger car fleet in Denmark. This is based on a reference down here. You're welcome to download. And yeah, basically looking at the whole life cycle from the material extraction over the production of, in this case, fuels for the conventional driven cars, hydrogen for the hydrogen driven cars, electricity for the electric vehicles, and so forth. And we have then the use stage here, and then we have the end of life of the different systems. So this is, very simplified life cycle that we need to think in. And we need to identify what are the main processes along the life cycle. Listed a lot of them here in the raw material stage. Of course, a lot is about the fuel. You can see crude oil, biomass, what have you for fuel. But also the rare earth metals for cars, for batteries, for electric motors, and so forth. The production, both the production of the fuels from the raw resources, but also the manufacturing of the cars, of course. The use, refueling, charging, and so forth, and the disposal, the end of life, potential recycling, and so forth. So now the idea is to go in the third phase and map the potential effects. And the effects that we're talking about here are effects or are consequences of the implementation of the new technology. So what changes in society if we introduce these new results, these new applications? And there are both direct effects, which are typically the intended effects. So we will see a quicker phasing out of internal combustion engine vehicles. We will see a more rapid increase of electric vehicles and so forth. But there are also indirect effects, which are that we'll see an increase in the use of electricity, for instance, if all the fleet or a larger share of the fleet will be running on electricity. And some of them also unintended, simply they happen as a consequence. We see an increased demand maybe for cobalt that could have some geopolitical consequences in some of these troubled regions where we have the mining. And these effects define the new system. So the new system is the baseline, and then with these changes imposed on it. The project has some results, they're applied, and we then see changes. There's some physical changes in the system and some non-physical changes, also social behavior, economic growth, and so forth. So you can see a lot of this is really about inspiring the PhD students to think about this, to think it through, because we cannot give the right answer. We can develop a lot of different scenarios, but just to have them think. Because some of the things that they will find out through this may inspire them to change their research focus or the way they approach their research. And at least they will tell them overall what's then good and what's bad, potentially bad about the outcomes of their results. So which effects are then relevant? Well, there's some examples here. I already mentioned them, of course. There are consequences in the raw material stage, both for the extraction of crude oil, but also use of metals for the electric mobility, both for the magnets in the motors and also the battery technology. The manufacturing, many parts are similar, but of course there are some effects from battery production, and the rest, a large part of the car production is actually the same. Fuel combustion in the power plant, of course we have an increased combustion in power plants if we still have power plants, but in most parts of the world we will have that for a considerable time. Looking ahead, and even in Denmark it will be biofuels to a large extent as well for charging the electric vehicles. And then end of life, there's a main effect that we suddenly have a lot of batteries that we need to recycle. What possibilities does that give? What negative impacts does it give? So the fourth stage, the evaluation of contribution to SDGs. This is where we establish a connection, or we ask the users to establish a connection between these effects. These were just examples, right? There will be many effects. Between the identified effects and the SDGs. And this requires, of course, that we have an overview not of the SDGs, but of the targets. The 169 targets, because these are what are affected, right? And there are some existing tools that can be useful. It's quite laborious at first, but I'll show you one of the tools here that we use or draw on in the guideline. So we have an effect here that we identify decreased fuel combustion in the car engine. A consequence, we have reduced emission of pollutants emitted to air, such as carbon dioxide, of course, but also particulate matter, particularly if we're talking diesel cars, the nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxides, and so forth. This, for instance, impacts on the SDG 12 target number 4, which is about the sound management of chemical and wastes throughout the life cycle in accordance with agreed international frameworks and so forth. That's one. And when we have that one, then we can use a tool like this, SDG interlinkages, that says, okay, 12.4, which other targets does that link to? So potentially, you should consider, if you have an impact on 12.4, you should also consider these other targets. And that then, based on that screening, allows us to go in and say, okay, we have less hazardous chemicals and particles, PM2.5, inhaled by human beings. Well, that's target 3.9. We have reduced chemical pollutants transported in air and deposited in the ocean. Well, that would be target 14.1. So we identified a lot of different targets. Now, these are just potential impacts, but what about some quantitative evaluation? My group is called Quantitative Sustainability Assessment. So how do we go about that? Well, this is where we're still working on it, I would say. Here we see some examples of 2 effects. Some SDGs where we have identified, and targets under these SDGs where we have identified that these effects actually have some consequences. They can be both positive and negative, and this is a very important message as well to the students. You need to consider both positive and negative impacts. Of course there will be negative impacts as well. Everybody thinks about, I want to save the world, right? So I'll go out there and I'll create something that really enables us to solve some problems. But of course there will also potentially be negative impacts. And what we address them, how we address them at the moment is, how likely is it that this effect occurs? Is it very likely? Or is it potential? We only have 2 steps: likely, possible, or unlikely. And what's the magnitude? Is it a big impact, or is it a moderate impact, or a minor impact? And based on this, at this point, we just have this semi-quantitative score, so it can be double plus, plus, or 0. And that allows us to take our findings and present them in a graph like this, where we have the life cycle of the product, the different stages. We have the raw material stage here, the production, use, end of life. And these are then the identified effects that the implementation, the application has on society. 16 in this case have been identified. And then the evaluation of, okay, so what is the SDG impact? And I would say, when you want to look at where should you focus, and this is for PhD projects, this would be for companies as well doing this exercise, I would start up here, of course, and down here. So where are the big ones? The big ones in terms of a combination, that they are likely, and that they have a big magnitude. And this is then what we do in the interpretation. So what are the main impacts that you should focus on? Which SDGs are most relevant for the project? The largest contributions, both positive and negative, and where? Where do they occur and why? And is this something you can address in your research? Or if you were a company, what can you do about it? So of course there's a materiality assessment here. Are there trade-offs between the stages, between the different SDGs, when we consider all positive and negative contributions? This is of course, if you go in and say, okay, there seems to be a problem here, then we could do this instead. Well, then you have to roll it out, of course. You look at the whole life cycle, the whole system, and you also look across the SDGs. And are there trade-offs between social, economic, and environmental dimensions? These are examples of questions that we can answer. And I should perhaps finish and say this PhD course, where we train them in this method, half of the course is also for training them in popular science communication. So the ambition is that they afterwards can go out to Danish high schools and tell about their research and what the sustainability implications are of that. And we have a few. We ran it the first time in March, in June, and we have a few experience now, or a little experience now with students who actually went out and presented this at high schools. So I think this is very encouraging. There's a big enthusiasm, I think, and also feel of need among not least high school students that they really want to be part of the solution in this, and it's urgent. So that concludes my talk.
Thank you, Michael. As
I mentioned, this is all PhD students at DTU. So all PhD students at DTU have to follow this course. It's mandatory part of their study plan. So we're talking 450 to 500 students per year that we will run this through. So it's quite an effort. So they all have to do it. Of course, some have PhD topics that are more obvious than others. I mean, we had two of Tim's PhD students who are working on circular economy strategies and solutions, and maybe eco-design. Then it's quite obvious. But there are really some of the others from DTU Compute, for instance, where you know, it's not that it's not relevant. It can be extremely relevant. As I just saw Leif Oxenlöve next door telling about how we can reduce the power consumption of the internet by a factor 10. Through new technology that his group is working on. So, I mean, development laser technology for optic fiber and so forth. So you know, the big things are there, but the challenge, of course, is larger.
All PhD projects.
Any PhD project at DTU.
I think the method is very interesting, and I think it's great that our PhDs are doing this. But I'm thinking that it would be nice to disseminate this to a larger audience, not only PhD students, but also regular students, and maybe companies. So it's a lot of steps, and it's a relatively complex thing to do. So I was thinking if you can build some kind of tool or something which guides people over all these steps.
Yeah.
It would be quite useful.
So far, we have a guideline that a written guideline. So not an electronic tool, but you're right. That should be done, and I think that could be done. Of course, a lot of the thinking has still to go on in the mind of the PhD students. I should say that we are at the moment redefining the course on science philosophy for engineers, which all students at DTU have to pass, and we will take this and build it into that course as well. So they don't have research projects, but they have whatever food engineering students, for instance, and then they will get a case about food where we say, suppose that we make this change in our food system. What are the sustainability implications of that? And then they'll be working on that. So I will actually give them something very similar to what you've seen here for all students, bachelor students at DTU over the next years. So, and I would love to give something actually for colleagues at DTU, because just because you're not so lucky that you're a PhD student now and have the chance to learn it, I think a lot of colleagues could also benefit from this. But so.
Hi, my name is Stefan. I wondered how your method, how that varies or differs from the method of the SDG roadmap, which are what the private sector are most commonly proceeding with for figuring out their high positive and negative impact areas.
I would encourage you to pose that question to the later presenters, because I think they're also inspired by that. So I don't know the details about the SDG roadmap method, but I would say what I would highlight from here is the life cycle approach, very stringent life cycle approach, and also the structured method that really forces you to go through. And then potentially, of course, the evaluation part. I don't know what they're doing there, but yeah.
Many thanks, Michael.
Sure.
So now we've heard from two scientific presentations, one about the scoping of the SDGs and then about a screening tool which all of our PhD students are starting to be presented with as part of their compulsory courses here at DTU. And now we turn to the business world. A part of the business world which is extremely important for Denmark is, of course, the technical consultancies. And we have three different companies who are going to give their view on how they're actually helping us with the SDGs in their technical consultancy. So I'd like to first welcome Nana Sofia Gudlandsen from NIOS, and you are SDG Ambassador.
Yes.
So maybe you can tell us what an SDG Ambassador is, and then here is your presentation, but we're looking forward to your presentation about how NIOS is supporting the SDGs. Off you go.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me today. As Tim just said, my name is Nana Gudmundsen and I'm from NIOS. I'm an engineer at NIOS, but a part of my work has been the past year and a half is how we can translate these SDGs into concrete actions and goals for our clients. So I'm going to present two of the tools that we have created in NIOS and take you through the process and the idea behind them. But first of all, I'd like to say just about 2 years ago that we decided that the SDG should be a part of the strategy in NIOS, and it should be a part of every sector we have. I come personally from the building sector, but it is an idea to integrate it in all the projects. alongside it, that we can implement it in all project cycles and phases. So here we have, of course, the 17 goals, and the 17 has been 169 targets and 230, and I think it's 33 indicators now. It's a large amount. It's a big impact, and it's a large task to take on. So we've tried to go through all of these goals and then find a way that we can guide our clients into perhaps focusing their efforts and instead focusing their impacts to where they can actually achieve the most, instead of trying to focus everything on all 17 goals. So that has been our major challenge in years. It's first to understand these goals, to translate them. As many of you probably read them, they're defined per countries. You measure them per countries, per inhabitants, per GDP. It's very difficult if you're talking about a specific building project. Let's say I'm doing a renovation of a school. It's very difficult to then translate that directly into the defined SDGs. So we need some kind of translator in between, and that's kind of the role we're trying to provide. It says here we have 3 employees who can do that. We may be on the way to only 2 employees. It's not something that's all the way through the entire company yet. This is a process, and it is going to take some time to get there. So firstly, I'm just going to explain this one tool we call Stakeholder Capture, which is a free tool. You can access it via our website if you'd like. And we like to call it a dialogue tool, which can assist you in starting that first dialogue on how you're going to work with SDG, how your company or your strategy or your project can have an implication. It's in a more simplistic version. It's a, let's say, a guided way to go through all of the 169 targets in a slightly easier way. What we have been missing a little bit, which is now we've created one that's slightly more project specific. We call it SDG Measure, which is a tool that has been focused on the specific sectors. So we started out with the building sector, which is where I'm from in our company, and we've tried to then translate each of the relevant targets and goals into concrete actions for the building sector, for building projects. So it's, again, we have the SDG Capture, which is the overall site, and then you would have the SDG Measure, which is a more project-specific version. And the idea behind it is to, as I said, translate it into this project-specific context. But first of all, start by prioritizing. As I said, you can't do all 17. It might be too difficult, at least now. The optimal version is that eventually we will be able to impact all 17, but it's not relevant to all building projects, at least. So prioritize, see where do you have the largest impact, where's your largest potential. And from there, then define goal setting. So the indicators in the SDGs provide a way to define these goal setting, but you need to be specific to define and say how far do we want to go, what do we want to reach, and from there then define the actions. I think what has been the primary way people have gone about this so far is to look at what do we do now, okay, how big is the impact, that's the goal we chose. So the idea is to turn that method around and then start the other way by first prioritizing and then setting your goals and then defining the actions. And of course, I'm very fond that Michael just mentioned the lifecycle analysis, which is something we've talked about for quite a bit. We find it extremely important to identify where can you measure the impact of the SDGs in the life cycle of a project. So the idea is to first look at what is the resource extraction, the project and planning, the construction phase, then the use, the operations of the building, and then lastly, end of life, the recycling phase. And we defined the way you place the SDGs, you place it in the life cycle phase where you can measure the impact. This is a way to kind of keep that overview of, we might be able to measure an impact, let's say in the operations phase, but we have to take the decision, we have to make the choices already in the planning and production phase. And through that, we've gone through the 17 goals, and this is again in regards to the building sector. This is our prototype now. Eventually it will be applicable for more than one of our sectors in NIAS. But we've gone through the 17 goals where we've tried to define for each of the goals, what is the guiding star? What is where is it that the building sector needs to go? To kind of always have that perspective of, this is where our project is, this is where the entire sector needs to go. So you can always kind of define, how far should I push? And this is NIAS defined, so it's not yet something that is defined by the entire consensus of the entire building sector, We have now a hope that we're going to start a PhD in collaboration with the DTU, Industrial PhD, which can help define these guiding stars. It can become something the entire industry agrees on. Because it's very difficult. Today we are represented by different consulting firms, and we all have each our own approach. It would be great if one day we'd all have the same end goal, the same way to measure this. So here's just an example. Please bear with me, this is in Danish because so far the targets, well, the program is in Danish. I've tried to do a little, let's say, Photoshop work and then change a little bit of it. But this is the general description from the UN. And then we've created one that would say the definition of what would it be in the building sector. Roughly said for goal 7, we say that you say 40% approximately of the energy consumption in Denmark is used by just operations of buildings. That's a large number. So what is the two things you can do? There's two different ways. You can do passive. You can minimize your consumption. Firstly of all, that's the easiest way. Other way is to look where do you get your resources. Is it sustainable resources? Is it solar panels? Can the building itself provide this? Can you in some way contribute to this? And in that regard, we mean more than just meeting the requirements of the building regulations. Because we all know you can't build without putting solar panels on the roof right now, because that's just the minimum requirement. So we believe in order to show that you've done more, you need to go further than building regulations. And from that, we've then singled out some of the targets and then translated them into focus areas to define and make it more simple for the client. These are just examples of focus areas that contribute directly to some of the targets. This is just an inspiration palette that's to start the dialogue with our clients. Some might be more specific for their specific project. They are slightly generic at this stage. But for example, if you have the first one, before 2030, half of let me just try that again. Before 2030, the range of sustainable energy used in the global energy mix should be substantially increased. Roughly said, you can say that means you have to produce sustainable energy. You have to produce renewable energy in the form of solar panels, for example. So that's kind of the method we've done to try to translate it into a more simple way, because many of our clients are not able to go through all 169 targets. So it's a way to kind of make this more feasible and easier for them to work with. And from there, after you've decided on which focus areas to work with, you define your goal setting. You define how far do you want to go. This is both the benefit and the slight, let's say, difficult part about the goals is that there is no perfect or easy way to define these. You define them yourself, how far you want to go. So you have to define how ambitious you want to be. And that is, of course, our role as consultants to help define this, as it is an ambitious status and it's not greenwashing. So you define your goal setting, and from there then define what could be an example of some of the initiatives you work with, what actions can contribute to achieving your goals. We find it very important as well that a part of the program is also to highlight the negative impact. We know in some scenarios we might do a renovation of a building where we find you want to achieve a very high indoor climate. We find that to be in, let's say, in goal 3, because you improve the working conditions for your employees. But most of us also know that if you want to achieve a better indoor climate, you need a more efficient and you need a better ventilation system. That's going to increase your energy consumption. So we find it's important that you have that negative impact on then another goal with, and then define what is going to be the maximum negative impact on, for example, goal 7 in order to achieve goal 3. So you always have that parallel impact and map it instead of just, let's say, push it under the rug. So through there, you get out, let's say, a simple, you get a report from there, which can then show your the different goals you're working with in the different life cycle phases, and then which contributing factors you have added. And that's the overall idea behind this tool. Yes?
Thank you, Nana. Very nice presentation. Any clarification questions?
I just wonder the quantitative aspect. How do you take cost into the
But we have to do it as a parallel analysis. The thing about this tool is it's not one where you can just add everything in and then it sprouts out an answer. It's a process tool. So a lot of the things are still going to be alongside it. And it is one of the difficult parts we are struggling with. We can do it with many of the goals. We can do the cost-benefit analysis as regard to energy and water. But some of the softer tools, some of the social goals is slightly more difficult. And we are trying to spread out into that. We have several parties that can help it, but there's no scientific data to provide at this moment now. And that's also the struggle we have in the building sector, is that the client wants to be able to see what is the bottom line.
Yes, my name is Embora from DTU Management, and my question goes to, is you have just explained the process, like the tools that you use. Is this project integrated in what you're offering your clients? And if so, any results, or is it just a target? Because you say you started 2 years ago, and then I would like to know if you have implemented these indicators or used the tool that you have introduced to us.
So we only took the tool live about a little bit less than half a year ago. We've been working with SDGs for about 2 years in the company, and it's taken about a year to develop this. So we've only gone through about one project fully, one with the metro company, where we've actually gone through all of the goals to identify the indicators. The difficult part is that these are projects that are running very long. For example, with the metro company, it's the new metro line to Lindholm. We're only going to start building that in 2030. So it's a way to minimize the impact, but we're only going to measure the results way further down the line.
Many thanks, Nana.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is from COVI, and it's from Carsten Fjorbak, who is Development Director for Climate Adaptation. And he's going to give COVI's take on how to support high-tech companies in technology, innovation and consultancy with the SDGs in mind. Over to you, Carsten.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here. I would like to take the story about using the SDG tools to foster sustainability and to foster innovation solutions. But first of all, I'm working in COVI, where I got about 7,000 colleagues. And as I'm talking, we have 15,000 projects running. And as you can see here, sustainability is a part of our DNA. It's a long story. You can see from more than 40 years ago, here's at DTU, we were part of this contribution to the first zero energy house here at DTU, and so on. And here, so you can see that sustainability is part of the DNA and our projects and the way we're working and thinking. In 2011, in COVI, we were creating this sustainability dialogue tool. Just to tell you that the SDGs, we've been working with them before they were named the SDGs. But here you can see the classical one with the environment, social and economy in different themes, where you can score your project or the ambitions of how you work towards. So this is a dialogue tool which we created in 2011, and it's been used on big infrastructure projects, road buildings and things like that. So we have a history of working with sustainability as a dialogue tool. And you can see here, the process for this dialogue tool is some clarification of ambitions, and then you go through all the steps of development strategy, solutions, implementation, and evaluation. So we ask ourselves, well, should we create a new SDG tool now the SDGs is part of the agenda? And now we're in the process of saying, well, we had this tool which we've been working for many years. We have experience, so our challenge is now how to combine the SDGs into this approach we've been working with and got experience with for a long time. So we're looking at that right now. So, looking at COVI, here you have a statement from Lars Peter Søby, which is the CEO, saying that we will try to also accelerate our contribution to a sustainable society, both in terms of our own resource, what we're doing, what we're eating in the canteen, the way we're traveling, using Skype and all this kind of things. But where the big effort we can do or change is in all the projects, 15,000 projects which we're running all the time. So in COVID, we made the statement that we've been picking out 5 main SDGs, which is our focus. Not saying the rest of them is not we're not working with them, but this in COVID is the main SDGs which we've been focusing on now. So just some examples here to the left for you. You can see it's an urban development project which I've been working on for many years, and it was fun to see how we just tried to translate this project into the SDGs, and found out that it was the project was meeting actually 7 or 8 of them. Some of them in the vision or the theme or the headline of the SDG, but others also where we could quantificate them. Here is something about 40% reduction of the use of groundwater. So it was just an example of taking some of the projects which we've been working with and putting them into the context of the SDG. Here's another one. It's a power plant where we are the advisors, and we've been looking for, okay, now we're going to build this power plant. Let's try to make a screening of how we can evaluate where the SDGs can be part of the project. An example could be biodiversity, which is a big theme, and also which is part of the SDGs. And here we've been looking at how can this project contribute to biodiversity. For example, you can look at the roofs. You can go from a classic roof to the green roof, and then you can measure. Well, first of all, it takes half of the rain which is falling, and it's a contribution to biodiversity. And then you can also calculate how much does it cost. So there's made this big catalog for many different things. So the project owner can see, well, where can I contribute to the SDGs and how much this is costing me? Because that's a big challenge. It's easy, not easy, but it's possible to make this grading of where you can contribute to the SDGs. But often we end up, well, are people prepared to pay for it? So this is, but the example I want to talk about here is because we ask ourselves, how can we speed up these projects? Because it's a burning platform. We don't have that much time to make different tools, investigations and things. We have to do that, but we have to act immediately. In Denmark, there's used 300 billion kroners in public buying each year. And often we are advisors trying to help how to make those offers as good as possible. And in this project, we're working for trying to help Aarhus Utility, which want to create the world's most efficient, resource-efficient wastewater plant. It's an investment for 1.7 billion Danish kroners. And here we've been talking about, well, is it possible to take in the SDGs to be part of this project, and by this moving all the people which is going to make offers on how to create the buildings and technologies and things like that. And for a long time, we've been Aarhus municipality have been working with different innovation themes of how to create this project. That's been looking at human resources, physical resources, financial resources, political resources, and here you can see the different innovation challenges which have been listed, which is part of the creating this project. So now we've been working how to integrate the SDGs into this innovation challenges, where you can see here, for example, we had taken all the different SDGs and been looking at the innovation challenges and where they're combined. So now we is telling to all the people, all the companies, which is going to bid on this, both the buildings, the technology, and think, well, you have to think about the SDGs because innovation is part of this project. We want to integrate the SDGs. And a closer example is, for example, the SDG 12, where the innovation challenge is how to handle residual slots that can contribute to circular economy. It's innovation challenge 7, where Aarhus Water would like the business partners to be energy conscious and the whole project during the design phase and so on. So we're not telling people how to do it, but we're telling people, if you want to be part of this project, you have to think in innovation, you have to think in integrating the SDGs. So this is just an example of how to integrate it in project solutions, in project development and innovation, where we want to push the markets when we have this role. But every day we're trying to do it in our own projects. For example, all 15,000 projects in COVID, when you start a new project, you have to screen it, how it's related to the SDG. And I could keep on telling examples where we try to integrate it on a daily basis on the projects. But it's both a big challenge because it's complicated often. But for me personally, the SDGs is both working on a vision where you have a common language together, the 17 SDGs, but it gets very complicated when we want to measure it. But often when we take it down, for example, working on water, on energy, we can start working on calculating how much water reduction, how much energy reduction. So I think the important way, or the right way to do it, is to not getting too confused about the 7 SDGs and the 119 sub-goals and targets, but to cut it down and maybe look at just a few sub-targets and work from there, which we've been doing. So it was just a short presentation of how we in COVI is working with it. Sustainability is part of our DNA. We had a tool for which we've been using for close to 10 years now, working on sustainability. Right now we're looking at all the SDGs and see how could we combine those, the SDGs, into our tool, so there's a connection. We will not make a new COVID SDG tool at that moment, but integrate it into an existing tool where we have experience. But on a daily basis, we try to put it into all the different projects, both in the dialogue with all our colleagues, inspiration and so on, because we have colleagues saying, well, we've been working with sustainability for a long time. Well, what is this now talking about the SDG? So also there we have to make a new agenda inside our company to understand the possibility on this SDG agenda, which I see as a burning platform. And we have to do everything at the right now to speed up both the dialogue, the inspiration, and also the sharing the results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carsten. Any questions or clarifications for Carsten? Thomas.
Thomas Christensen, since you've been working with this for so many years in so many projects, could you give any examples on where when people have started doing this, has changed their approach or the outcome of what they've been doing? Or has it been more like a communications framework that you have established?
Me personally, have not been working with, I've just been in COVID for 4 or 5 years. But my good colleague Lisbeth knows something about it, and other colleagues, Linda Højby, which have been working professional with it. So it's been part of a dialogue. So I can't give you the examples, but I would like to invite you for a meeting where we can go down deeper and take all the experience. So it's been part of big infrastructure projects, but it's a dialogue tool where you start the dialogue and you find out how is your ambitions on energy, on transportation, on concrete consumption, on water and things like that. So it's a dialogue tool, but it's built up in a way where you can start to make both ambitions but also quantifications for your goals. So it's a dialogue tool with a concept and a work way how to do it.
Okay. We have a question at the back here.
Thank you. I'm Stephanie. I'm from the Assessment. I was just wondering, you said that there are sub-SDGs which are normally chosen or should be chosen. First of all, do they always happen to be, is there a bias towards certain SDGs, which are always the same one? And if there are, does this also apply, for example, CO2 reduction? And is it there quite easy because one can just pay for compensation, but doesn't really have to change anything about their own process?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but
Should I try? So the first question is, you mentioned that sub-SDGs are chosen. If you, for example, had some 5 different SDGs, which should be addressed. Are those, is there a bias to, let's say, always the same 5 SDGs for different projects, or do they vary completely from project to project? Because I could, for example, imagine that one is related to CO2 emissions, reducing CO2 emissions, because it could be quite easy to, for example, pay for compensation, offset, for example, paying forestation projects somewhere, but it's then not directly required to change anything in the own technology or in the own project, but one could still get the benefit of saying one has addressed this one SDG.
so if I understand you correctly, you're asking to the 5 main SDGs in COVID. It was just to speed up the process, because it was too difficult to say, well, we take all 17 and give them a main focus. So we chose five of them, even though we're working with all of them every day. So it's to try to make some focus on both the dialogue and in all the projects to enhance both the focus and how to implement the SDG challenge and possibilities into the projects. But I don't know if I answered you. Otherwise, we can take it up afterwards.
We had one final question, but you promised to pose it in the public at the end. So many thanks to you, Carsten. So last but not least, we have Rambøll, and Nikki Bai is the senior manager at Rambøll and is going to present the tool that Rambøll has for SDGs in their technical consultancy. And after that, we're going to take the plenum round of discussion with all the speakers. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Tim. So, yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here for this session. My name is Nikki Bai. I'm Senior Manager at Rambøll. Rambøll, to say this in very short, is a size of 15,000 engineers. And I'm from a division called Management Consulting, which is about 500 people. And I mentioned that because I have only joined Rambøll exactly 2 months ago. Early on being associate professor here at DTU in Michael's group. So it's a great pleasure to see so many former colleagues and students over here in my new role. And I also say that because what I'm going to explain to you are 2 tools which colleagues of mine have developed. I've not been along, but of course I'm along in using them and in the application part. So I would like to make one message or give one message already now. What I think is important. This is a tool session, and if we talk about tools, I see 2 important factors which are also let's say mirrored in the 2 tools I'm going to present to you, which is scope and specificity of the tools. So what are you actually applying the tools for, and who is let's say the one who's applying them? And the 2 examples are one from municipalities and one tool for companies actually. So, and to start off with the tool for municipalities, this tool was developed about a year ago, finalized early this year, and it's part of a so-called baseline project. What is a baseline project? The idea was to say, what do the SDGs actually mean in a country like Denmark? So it's about this, what we had heard earlier, the scoping, we had from Nikolai, the scoping around environment. We had from our industrial colleagues the scoping around infrastructure or building projects. And this would be actually to say the country of Denmark and the municipalities of Denmark, how would they look at SDGs? So what we did is basically what colleagues did is to look into the global goals as the framing around it and say this was a project for the 2030 panel of the Danish Folketinget, with focus on SDG 11. But the idea was really to make a baseline around adaptation of indicators. I jump into that right away. Make this SDG 11 Danish baseline and develop a dashboard for Danish municipalities so that you can work with that. Framing around is also mentioned here, partners from Danish Architecture Center, us from Ramble, Statistics Denmark, and local government Denmark Kommunernes Landsforening. Financed, by the way, also by Rumble themselves. So, and very heavy stakeholder involvement in this process around what do the SDGs mean in the context of Denmark. You can ask the question, why do we need a baseline? If we look into these international gorging tools, Denmark is actually scoring on a global level actually very well. If you are aware of that, you know, I mean, basically, Denmark is on the top of all these global rankings. So why say we need a baseline for the SDGs? And this is exactly this, what I'm saying, the scoping and making it specific for the applicants. So what was done is making a baseline, which is basically the 0-point measurement. How far are we actually in terms of sustainability and fulfilling the goals in Denmark? In which terms? And this graph is from a report from this project, which basically says that you always need to translate, so to say, international and local context. And what has been done is basically from the global international. This is where we have these international assessments, where Denmark always scores very high. Down, what does it actually mean in national municipality and in local levels? And this is what this project was about. So basically, the point is in order to make goals actionable, they need to be translated to the level which is intended to be where it is intended to be used on. These are the involved parties from the project, and just to give you a little bit idea about this stakeholder involvement, which is a very important thing in many Rumble projects, and especially in this one. This is Bornholm last summer, the Folkemøde on this, where there was a discussion about this. What is this Danish context of the SDGs? I don't go into details with this. Would just like to show you there was this heavy in four rounds, so to say, stakeholder involvement over this baseline project, which took about 3/4 of a year. Zooming into what was the focus in the baseline. SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. This SDG has 10 targets. And again, to zoom into one concrete one, the first one, 11.1, build adequate, safe and affordable housing. This would be one of the indicators where if you take it as is, Denmark would score very high. And of course, yeah, there are no problems. The UN official definition of this is by 2030, ensure access for all to adequate, safe and affordable housing and basic services and upgrade slums. Okay, and then from the stakeholder dialogue and basically the finding was, okay, for instance, the entire idea of slums is not really applicable to Denmark. So how do we translate this into Danish context? This was done, and I'm jumping really into details here due to time, but the idea was to supplement the official indicators by those nationally relevant ones. And these four are the ones which were suggested and let's say filled with numbers and data. And I'd just like to give you one example of the development of rent in public residences, which is related to that. And all of a sudden, if you look into that, that's the figures from Denmark Statistik, you would see that, if you look at this supplemented indicator, development of rent in public residences, you can actually see that the rent in Denmark is rising more quick than the consumer prices, meaning that actually we are not performing so well in our local national context. So this is just to say this is one example of these adapted indicators, enlarged indicators in order to have this national context. And the colleagues did this for actually the entire set of the 10 indicators, targets in SDG 11, which all have about 4 to 5 added indicators. So that's a set of 35, 40 added indicators to the existing official ones. Just to say there's room for improvement and figures to do. And this all is summarized in this report, which the link you get in a second here. That's this one down here, baseline report. And it's also in the tool, which I'm not going to present and go into, but in the tool, basically you can go in and compare as a municipality. All municipalities in Denmark are listed. You can compare yourself to other municipalities or to the Danish national average. So basically, again, broken down into these added indicators and making it possible to have a little bit more, let's say, specificity around the data that you look at. This was the first tool. And the second one I added, it actually was not on the plan to have this along, but it's for the private sector. Rumble works very much with the public sector, but also very much with the private sector. This tool was developed for the private sector. It's called Sdg Assessment Tool. And the basic idea around it was that, yes, we have the SDGs. They influence business, of course. Business acts and hopefully goes towards a direction of more sustainable business. And this also supports basically the SDGs. So it's actually a circle of activity. It's not just one way. The main idea, that's the main message regarding this tool, is this, that we divided the, let's say, the SDGs as such related to what companies are actually doing. And you can see there are 3 areas of activity. One is the actual products and services that they are developing, it's what's basically their core business. Around that is operations. You need machinery, you need buildings, you need transportation, logistics, and all these kind of things. And then there's an entire external sphere where basically the companies have indirect impact. You can see the separation here with direct impact in the first 2 ones and indirect impact in the external one and the parts of the external sphere, parts of the operations as well. So the point being, making it specific to what you are actually deciding upon in your business. And the one example from the now this thing is not working. It should actually come. This is one example of the. If we look into the pharmaceutical sector, so this tool was made as a pilot for the manufacturing sector, and this is an example of a pharmaceutical company in the manufacturing sector. So what would be relevant in the products and services generically, SDGs 2, 3, and 12, for instance, and in the operations, some others. That's towards the indirect impacts, and this is for the business administration. How do you run your business in terms of buildings and so on? And this is the manufacturing value chain, and then external community. So basically, what the colleagues here did is, depending on which industry you come from, a separation of the SDGs to begin with, so making it more specific to what you are working with. And this tool is available for free as well, SDG tool on rumble.com. And what you get is a report. You have to answer about 25, 30 questions, depending on which industry you come from. It's currently a pilot for the manufacturing industry, as said. But what you get is a tailor-made report for your company, for your situation, depending on what you answered in the round 30 questions before. And that's it. That's the 2 tools, basically. And thanks for having me. And I'm open for questions.
Any questions or clarifications for Nikki? Now you get a chance to ask the question.
And I have the answer.
I hope you do. Hi, Kat. I'm graduating here from engineering management. I'm just want to know, how important do you think it is to consider the actual targets when consultancies like your own or the other guys here develop these tools?
What do you mean with actual targets?
The targets defined under each goal, incorporating these targets, the actual targets within the tools? To which degree of importance do you think this is, and why?
I think it's about the reading. I mean, reading the targets in the context that they are supposed to be used for. Like you had with the municipalities, for instance, there's a certain indicator defined under target. If it doesn't make sense, you can just as well say it doesn't work, but you can then look into what does it mean actually in this context. Do we have, let's say, a twist on this target so it makes sense for our organization? The tool is just top-down from the existing set of SDGs and targets of the United Nations. So that's just the official part, not the twisted or the adapted ones. Okay.
You all want to have the plenum discussion. That's good. So we say thank you to Nikki first. So we're beautifully on time. We have 15 minutes left for a discussion. What we're going to do is I'm going to invite the speakers up to the stage. While they're coming up to the stage, I have some questions for the speakers. The first question is, could you relate your approaches and your methods to at least two of the other speakers? Tell what the similarities are and maybe what the unique characteristics of your approaches are. And while they're getting up on the stage, for you guys, 2 minutes, 2 and 2, what made the biggest impression on you just now? And how, in a high-tech perspective, can you use this within the context of high technology and the SDGs? So that's just a discussion with your neighbor. Find somebody you don't know, preferably, and we'll do that for 2 minutes while the other guys are getting set up. Okay, ladies and gentlemen? So, you all had something to discuss. So while you're listening to the first question, think of the discussions and prepare some questions. I'd like to ask in turn from, let's take it in the order that we have you standing, where do you see the similarities? Because I think one of the motivations, Michael, for this session was, of course, to see what are the similarities, but also what are the key characteristics, and how do we start to find some way ahead so that it's good with the competition, but it's also good with some agreement on how to approach the SDGs, and especially within a high-tech perspective. So, Michael, maybe just 30 seconds per person for some reflections.
Am I on here? Yeah, no, I heard you. Okay, so similarities, I was encouraged to see that all the approaches seem to have the life cycle thinking somewhat embedded. And I think what our approach hopefully can inspire is this structured and transparent approach to what's done. So the life cycle perspective, but also structured way of assessing it. And then, of course, the unique, well, ours is much more specific into details in a specific project, than what we saw.
Well, I think I found what together with the other consultants is that we are all asking to find this translation into our context. It's easy to define the goals of this universal language. The problem is then to translate it into the Danish context to find the places where we can still have a large impact and where we still have potential. And I think we all agree on that there is a need for some kind of consensus on where is the baseline, where is it we all need to go, and where are we right now?
Well, I agree with that because I think it's important now because now all the other SDGs, they're making baseline studies for that now, and we're waiting for that because when we see the final result there, I think maybe it's a time to make the Danish tool but it's okay with me that there's a few Rumble tools and a few NEAS tools, and we've been doing for some time, and will not make an SDG tool. But there's a lot of similarities. It's dialogue tools, and dialogue is very important. The next step is quantification, which is difficult.
Just to sing the same song, so to say, it's about the adaptation into the context where the client, whether it's a public or private client, is trying to apply that. And I think our role is also what I saw in the tools is this keeping the helicopter perspective, so that in order to avoid these, what Michael mentioned at the beginning, these sub-optimization and these, let's say, running to the wrong direction. So I think actually there's some room for joining forces around this specificity work, which I think is super thrilling.
Good. And Nikolai, how are they going to turn your yellow dots blue?
Well, yeah, that requires some work. And actually, I can see some similarities between the tools, that none of them is actually using the indicators that were proposed, by the UN at least. So, and there can be many reasons for that. Some of them are simply not applicable to companies or businesses, but some might be. And the challenge is really in evaluation. Use the indicators to do the evaluation.
Good. Thank you. Any questions from the audience?
I'm Vibeke Edwards from Novo Nordisk. I was wondering, you all talk about life cycle assessment, which I think is important and a basis for going on. But how about the connection to circular economy? I know it's kind of different perspective, but still it's even wider, I think.
Yeah, well, I'd like to give it a try. So circular economy, because that's this closing of loop that the strategy we are addressing now. So it's really the end of life. How can we make that the beginning of a new life, if you like? And I think the point here is that this is, in my mind, of course, a part of a more sustainable society. But what's really important right now is the stocks that we are building up of resources, just as much as the flows. So we are accumulating huge amount of resources in products, buildings, what have you. And of course, we should optimize the flows. We should not waste whenever we discard something, but we should really be concerned about the stocks, because that is the big one. So circular economy, part of the solution, but certainly not the full solution.
And maybe to add upon that, you can say that lifecycle assessment is the means in order to do something about circular economy and about sustainability. So it's a method, ISO standardized method, versus circular economy being, let's say, a paradigm and a political decision, and of course some action behind. But it's not a method. You cannot say we are circular if we do this and this. So in this way, they relate together.
Hello, my name is Anne-Marie. I'm from Climate Kick here at D2U. Thank you for a very interesting presentation of the three products. My burning question is definite. How is the interest and the uptake of your clients of these products?
Well, I would like to say there that there's a lot of interest. And I think I can talk for all of us. During the last few years, we can see a big shift with a focus on sustainability, on climate adaptation. So, for instance, when we work for the big pensions companies or municipalities and others, it's part of the agenda. So it's part of a dialogue all the time, because all of us, our company, we have all the knowledge and the technology to make this transformation. And so it's speeding up this dialogue. And also there we have an obligation, because we have the knowledge, we have all the things to make this shift and transformation and rethinking. So we have to speed up and be better also in this dialogue with the clients, because in the old days, we were more or less doing what we was asked to fix. But we're in a shift now where we have all the knowledge how to this transformation. So it's a big dialogue. But often it ends up because we can do all the economy also on the different projects. And in the end, it's other willingness to pay for the right solutions. And I start to see some saying, yes, we want to do this investment because in the long term, it's the right thing to do and also a good investment. So I start to see a shift where in the old days, it was most of the time was a focus on our economy. No, we can't make the green roof because it's cheaper to make a normal roof and so on.
To add upon that, maybe also I'd say the pattern of uptake at clients is just as diverse as sustainability is. And taking into account that clients, no matter public or private, they are at a certain stage, a certain maturity level. That's something that Tim is actually working a lot with in their learning about what's their take on and their approach towards sustainability. So if you have very advanced clients, you would say, yes, maybe these basic tools would not be enough, so you have to do this. So uptake is very diverse, I'd say. For some, it's a super great kick. For something, it's something from yesterday. So it really depends.
So maybe one comment on that as well. Thank you for the question. We have in the afternoon a session in hall, the main hall, so the exhibition hall, on which is really linked to this one. It's about how can businesses benefit from SDGs, and there will be several businesses coming and presenting how they do that, how they use it for business. So if others are sharing this question, I encourage you to go there. It's at 2:30, so in the main hall.
Question related to that. So it seems there is no real economic incentive right now for private sector to be more sustainable. But since there are now really tools to measure like the performance regarding to SDGs, could you imagine that in the future there will be something like a political way of implementing it, like SDG certificates or some kind of bonus for improving on that level. Is that going to happen?
Can I start on that one? Thank you. I'm not sure if that will be the perfect way to go forward, because it needs to be, at this point, it needs to be something the companies want to. The companies are realizing that they're going to be left behind if they don't work with SDGs. A certification will, I guess, in some point maybe end up being the same way as we do with other sustainability certification like DG&B. We often find that it's just a way you pay and then you for a certificate and then it's sustainable. But sustainability altogether is also the economic side. So it needs to be feasible in some way together. It's all three parts that need together to work together to be sustainable. So I'm not sure if legislative way to force people to do the SDGs is going to be the right way.
Well, I see more and more examples for that the SDGs and the way of thinking with sustainability is good business. We have more and more examples where you can see it's good business to make the right decision talking about sustainability and the SDGs. And both concrete on the different aspects in the project, but also for branding. And branding you can calculate to cool money also. So there's a lot of going on there. And I see a shift where it's not philanthropic all the time, it's also good economy. We have clients where they can see it's good business to this way of thinking. And they feel it's a good feeling also. So it's both the money and the heart which go together.
Hey, so my name is Sophie, I'm from Novozymes, and I have a question related to sustainability seen as a relative measurement, maybe rather than an absolute measurement. And what I'm wondering about is both in the assessment of university projects and in projects that you run together with businesses, would you consider to say that, sure, working with these SDGs, we can make this project relatively more sustainable, but actually it's just not sustainable what you're doing, so this should basically just be closed down. Is this something that you consider? For example, I'm thinking about, I know Copenhagen Airport is going carbon neutral, but I guess the only real way of making an airport carbon neutral is basically to close it down. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would imagine Copenhagen Airport has a different take on that one, but we can discuss that in a break. No, you're touching on something that is extremely important, exactly, to move from relative sustainability to absolute sustainability, because we've seen all these examples that everything gets more and more sustainable, but overall, with the growth of population and affluence and consumption, we're moving in the wrong direction altogether. And we need to have that total picture in to say what is actually sustainable in absolute terms. It's challenging. It's a research topic we've engaged a lot in. It's very challenging to actually say what is sustainable in absolute terms. So that's part of that's the research challenge. But we are certainly teaching that to our PhD students as well. The problem is, of course, scale and number of users of it and so forth really matter, because the impact that you can allow a certain activity to have, of course, depends on what level of needs does it meet. You know, if it's a fundamental need, and of course we cannot have food production without any impacts at all. And we need food production, right? That's one of the fundamental ones. So there are some challenges involved there. There's not a clear-cut answer yet, but we're working with several companies that want to have, in the ballpark, where do we need to be in order to be sustainable in absolute terms?
I think just adding shortly to that, I think it's important also to keep the perspective that, of course, it would be better today none of us can fly, but if we do that, it's going to have extreme social impacts. So there is always that relative term that some implications we can't avoid, but we need to minimize the negative impact. Which I think goes with what you're saying, Michael, is that it needs to be, you need to look at the absolute sustainability, because there is some social needs which is going to then have a negative impact on some of the other effluents. But it's, of course, the most sustainable way of a building would be perhaps to not build it in terms of CO2 or consumption. But then there's other implications.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're running short on time. What I'm going to ask you to do now is in the opposite direction, so you first, Nikolai, is to just one short reflection. How is high technology and the Sustainable Development Goals, are they bedfellows or are they enemies with each other? An easy question to end on. 20 seconds, and then when you finish, Michael, you can close the session.
we need technology to address the sustainability challenges, and but we need to know what is it we're aiming at, what's the target, what the technology should actually do, how well should it perform in order to be considered sustainable, in absolute terms perhaps, and this is the challenge to answer that question. How good the technology should be, and can we get there? We perhaps can if we commit enough resources, but you know, where are we aiming at? We need to know.
Technology is part of the solution, unavoidable, but it's very important. It's not the only part. It's the people's behavior and the patterns around technology, which are also important in order to get us to the goals.
More or less the same. For me, technology innovation is part of the answers how to make a better future for all of us. So, for example, when DTU is making a new building, you must have some high ambition of making innovation and new technology. So technology innovation is one of the answers.
Well, I can't disagree with any of those statements, to be honest. But I think one thing is that the two go hand in hand, but another part is also the mindset. We need to change our mindset, the way we live, the way we think. And that goes together with technology and SDGs.
Nice to be among engineers here. So
I'm not an engineer.
Sorry. But you're welcome anyway. No, I think what I said before, absolute sustainability, we're really talking in the climate range. We're talking about factor 10 improvements over a 10 to 15-year time horizon in the carbon efficiency of our technologies. And there's no way we can achieve that without technology. So for me, that's quite clear. It's a very important part of it. The big challenge is to take these exponential developments that we see, particularly in tech, to take them and use them for creating sustainable solutions, and not just for creating, new solutions that create new needs that we can then produce new products that can meet, right? So really to take it and make sustainability of the products or the consumption patterns a part of the product development goal. I mean, because I think the drivers are there, but we're not harnessed them, and we need really to make them, drivers of sustainable development rather than the usual story. And this is a big challenge.
Great. Many thanks. Can we join our hands and thank all 5 speakers for a very nice session?
Yeah, maybe one final practical remark. Now is lunch and networking, and I encourage you to go and see some of the many interesting startups that are display in the DTU library in Building 101. And you can have your lunch here, which I might actually recommend, because I think the competition and the lines are much less dreadful here than they will be probably in the other building. But you can do any of them. So thank you very much for coming. I hope we'll see some of you again in the afternoon session. Thank you.